Chapter 4, verse 1. Then went Boaz up to the gate and set him down there. And behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, There is such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. Meanwhile, as the sun arose, and the gate of the city of Bethlehem was being opened, Boaz made his way, as probably was his custom, he made his way to the cultural, political, and economic center of the city. This, the gate, was the prescribed location, the place to make his location of the closer kinsman. Since the Torah required that each city was to have judges and officers in the gates to judge the people with just judgment. Deuteronomy 16:18, for example. Judges and officers shalt thou make thee in all thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, throughout thy tribes, and they shall judge the people with just judgment. The nearer kinsman, was to be identified, likely a citizen of Bethlehem, who lived near his clan. He probably exited the city early in the morning, every day, to go about his work, and hoping to catch him on his way out. He, that is the kinsman, he was petitioned by Boaz to join Boaz and the other elders sitting within the gate. Now, what you're looking at here are pictures of an excavated gate at the city of Gezer, which is from the time of Solomon, about 950, we'll say BC. This is called the six-chambered gate. So this is the main route into the city, and then this particular six-chambered gate, right? It just looks like that. So you got a wall here, 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 and then right here, right, you have benches. That's all. Okay? So Boaz and the elders are just sitting somewhere around here, watching everyone who's coming in and out. Okay. Verse number 2. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, Sit down here. And they sat down. Upon the agreement of Boaz's relative, the kinsman, upon the agreement of Boaz's relative, to the invitation, Boaz gathers together what's called a minyan. A minyan. In Hebrew, a choram. This means 10 Jewish adults. You see, it took 10 men of the elders of the city. 10 Jewish adult males are considered a minyan. And to this very day, 10 Jewish men are required for certain political, religious, and administrative obligations, such as public prayer. You want a public prayer meeting? Even if you're in an airport at LAX, you have to have 10 Jewish men to have a public prayer meeting. The priestly blessing, public readings from Scripture, a wedding, all need to be done in the presence of at least 10 men. The 10 men agreed to sit, and since they agreed to sit, they are formally conveying a full court, which has the judiciary authority, which has the authority to determine the legal matter of the unnamed kinsman and Ruth. Back to, Deuteronomy 16:18, right? Judges and officers in the gate. Verse number 3. And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi that is coming out of the country of Moab selleth a parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's. Now, some understand this passage to mean that when Elimelech and his family left for Moab 10 years ago or whatever, that someone else moved in and squatted the land. reaping the harvests, the occasional harvest over the 10 years of famine when Naomi was gone. Others understand this to mean that the aged and the poor widow Naomi, without any sons or heirs to work the land, was determined to sell the field to help finance her living out her days in Judah. So, Naomi has come again from the country of Moab. She's selling a parcel of land, a plot of land that used to belong to her husband, Elimelech, who was both of ours relative. That's what he said. Okay, verse number 4. And I thought to advertise it to thee, saying, buy it before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. If thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know. For there is none to redeem it besides thee, and I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. Since both Boaz and the nearer kinsman, since they're both relatives of the aged Naomi, Boaz, following the protocol, following the culture's protocol, and keeping his promise to Ruth, he brought to the attention of the kinsman, the unnamed kinsman, that the kinsman, he was first in line to have the option of buying Naomi's land. Therefore, in verse number 4, the kinsman chose to purchase the land, which he was probably familiar with, since it was under the ownership of his relatives. Verse 5. Then said Boaz, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. So in verse number 5, guys, Boaz, he continues by stating that if the kinsman, if he purchased the land that belonged to Naomi, there was a proviso, there was an amendment attached to the bill. There was a proviso that required him not only to support Naomi, which was within reason, because that's his relative, his old aged aunt or something, you know, but he also had to marry her widowed daughter-in-law from Moab and bear a son by her in order to perpetuate Naomi's late son's name and keep the land in the family. So you got to really, really, really want to buy this land, right, to take all or nothing. Verse 6. And the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I buy my own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. If the kinsman could have simply purchased the land, if the kinsman could have just simply purchased the land from Naomi, he would have increased the capital investment, the net worth of his own family. Okay? But if he also married Ruth, the kinsman would be spending the family's fortune for the benefit of the heirs of his dead relative, Malcham, Ruth's husband. Therefore, he would have been divesting the rights, spending the inheritance of his own kids, of his own heirs, spending their inheritance on the heirs of Malcham, Ruth's dead husband. In other words, Ruth's children, not the kinsman's children, would inherit the purchase field. And the money for the field, the money to upkeep the field, would also have come out of the kinsman's children's inheritance. Verse 7. Now, this was the manner in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing. For to confirm all things, a man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, and this was a testimony in Israel. Apparently, the custom of taking off the sandal and giving it to another was a symbolic transfer of one estate or property to another. One estate or property to another. Maybe this is an example in Psalm 68, I don't know. Moab is my wash bowl. Over Edom I shall throw my shoe. Maybe this throwing of the shoe is a symbolic transfer of taking the land of Edom away from the Edomites and giving it to the people of God. I don't know. But certainly it's an insult to throw someone's shoe at someone in the world of the Bible. Even today. Remember way back when George Bush was in Iraq at the news conference and he threw his shoe at him. That was like, oh my goodness. Yeah. And that's why, in that verse, how does it go? In the upper room discourse, my familiar friend, quoting the Psalms, my familiar friend has lifted up his heel against me. Remember that? Maybe? Okay. In the words of the Bible, to lift up your heel against someone, to show them the bottom of your shoe, is the greatest insult.
It's not just get a rock out of it.
Oh no, this is bad. You do not show someone the bottom of your shoe.
So you want to kick up your feet in that living room?
Exactly. Perhaps the practice alluded to of the taking off the sandal, maybe it's alluding to God's faithful provision for the Hebrews during the 40 years of the wilderness wanderings, where I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes are not waxing old on you. Your shoe is not waxing old on your foot. Maybe we have, just as God's provision provided for us during the 40 years of the wanderings, that this shouldn't even get old, right? May this contract, this covenant also, like God's provision, never wane. I don't know. The symbolism may have meant that the business between the two parties would never wear out. The choice of the sandal, like I said before, is peculiar because it's a great insult to show the bottom of your sandal or your shoe to someone in the words of the Bible, and that's that John 13:18 passage. Okay, verse 8. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, buy it for thee, so he drew off his shoe. It does not state in verse number 8 which party removed their sandal. Was it Boaz or was it the kinsman? Nevertheless, a binding and a public confirmation of the negotiation was established. Binding of the public confirmation. It was established. Verse 9. And Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, you are witnesses this day, that I have bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon of the hand of Naomi. What's going on in verse number 9? Well, Boaz is publicly proclaiming that he had purchased the property, the estate of the husband, the late husband, and the late sons of Naomi, paying the value of it to the aged widow. He gave her market value. Although Orpah, remember her, the widow of Chilion, was living, no regard was paid to her in the disposal of her late husband's property, since, remember before, she had officially ended any formal relations between the houses of Elimelech and her house. Okay, verse 10. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren and from the gate of his place. You are witnesses this day. Through the actions of Boaz and Ruth, the two greatest values of ancient Israelite society, land and family. Land and family. They were restored to Naomi. So through the actions of Boaz and Ruth, the two greatest values of ancient Near Eastern Israelite society, land and family, are restored to Naomi. She would no longer be landless, she would no longer be childless, or without any legal or economic protection. Verse 11. And all the people that were in the gates and the elders said, We are witnesses, the Lord make the woman that is come into thy house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel. Do thou worthily in Ephrathah be famous, Bethlehem. There were, at this time, apparently no religious, quote unquote, there were no religious ceremonies at the wedding feast. In place of the religious ceremony at the wedding feast were these benedictions that we see here of friends and family. This is a great example of what a blessing would have included. The crowd wished upon Boaz. The crowd wishes upon Boaz that as the wives of Jacob laid the foundation for the nation of Israel, so may his wife, so may Ruth, build upon that same legacy and also bear patriarchs of the nation. The second blessing in the verse also appears to be directed towards Boaz, that he would continue to prosper in wisdom and in power in his hometown, because remember, Ephrathah is the ancient name of Bethlehem. And that his good name, that Boaz's good name, would be sounded through the land. Verse 12. Let thy house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. Ruth bore a son. Ruth bore a son, through whose line, specifically through his descendant, Christ, but Ruth bore a son, through whose line as many people as the sands of the sea were born again to God. Also, in being the ancestor of Jesus, the son of David, Ruth was instrumental in the blessing of all that are saved by him. So let thy house be like the house of Tamar, who Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee this young woman. Verse number 13. So Boaz took Ruth. Verse 13. Boaz took Ruth. She was his wife, and he went in unto her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. It's possible that Ruth had been barren, since she did not bear children to Malchon in 10 years of marriage to him. Okay? And if that is the case, her story is similar to the barren woman motif or pattern that threads through the narratives of the promised line. Just like Sarah, just like Rebecca, just like Rachel, etc. Right? She too miraculously bears a son. Verse number 14. And the woman said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. Women from Bethlehem, probably the midwives who delivered the baby, the women from Bethlehem praised God upon the birth of the child. The baby was born healthy and whole with 10 fingers and 10 toes, praising God for the birth of the child, who was the heir, the inheritor of Naomi's estate. The women customarily offer up a blessing upon the child, okay? That the child would be a worthy and honorable man, just like his father Boaz. Verse 15. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thy old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. So the point is that the child, the baby boy, would renew the life of Naomi. The baby boy would renew the life of Naomi, who had been sorrowful, Mara, since the death of her husband and her sons, and would sustain Naomi in her old age. How would the baby sustain Naomi in her old age? By managing the family's large estate. Hence, he's a restorer of her life and a nourisher in her old age. Ruth is praised here for bearing an heir to continue the estate. Come on. Verse number 16. And Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom and became nurse unto it. So either the child was right after birth, either the child was brought to Naomi for help in nursing the child and raising the boy, or the child was handed off, for lack of a better word, to Naomi after the child was weaned. One of those two. Okay?
Wouldn't it make more sense to after the meeting?
Well, that's what I thought too, but I asked my friends who were missionaries in Africa, and they said in that part of the world, older women, they still give child suck.
Because they just continue to throughout their lives?
I'm not sure the mechanics of it,
Well,
but, apparently
if you stop, then it goes.
apparently they can still nurse the children,
So
and they do it.
Is that where it takes a village to raise a child?
Something like that.
Well, physiologically it's possible because, parts are there sort of, but,
Verse 16.
I guess,
We'll make that 7.
because women can nurse babies that they've adopted.
Yes.
I need to take like a medical class or something.
Verse 17. And the woman her neighbors gave it a name, saying, There is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. He's the father of Jesse, the father of David. Verse number 17. As was the custom, the child was likely named on the 8th day. On the 8th day. Why? Because that is the day of his circumcision. And it came to pass that on the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they called his name Zacharias. The reason for naming the child after the circumcision, right? Why do they name the child after the circumcision? I think it is rooted or based in the Abrahamic narrative that he gets his new name after he's circumcised. I think. The name of this child was uncharacteristically not given by the father, but by the women of the town.
This is 418.
This is 17, verse 17. His name was given by the women of the town, who hoped his name, which means servant, Obed, servant, that it would be indicative of the service that he would be to Naomi in her old age.
Did you say Obed meant servant?
Yes. Obed was the father of Jesse, the Bethlehemite. We see that in 1 Samuel 16:1. The Lord said to Samuel, How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. Okay? So Obed is the father of Jesse the Bethlehemite, and of course the grandfather of David the king. Verse 18. Now, these are the generations of Pharez. Pharez begot Esron. Probably, in verse 18, probably linking the Gentile mothers. The Gentile mothers, both of Pharez, because that was Tamar, remember her, right? And Obed, Ruth, right? Linking the Gentile mothers of Tamar and Ruth with the tribe of Judah, verse 18. The author did not start his genealogy of David, of King David, with Abraham, like Matthew does. But he starts the genealogy of King David with Pharez, the son of Judah, by the Gentile, you fill in the blank, Tamar. Verse number 19. And Ashram begot Aram, Aram begot Aminadab. This genealogical conclusion, in verse number 19, continues to be anchored firmly into the overarching, let me repeat that, the genealogical conclusion continues to be anchored firmly in the overarching historical context of the Bible. These descendants, in verse number 19, these descendants would have been born in exile in Egypt. The Jews' concern for pedigree, for genealogies, has existed since in the beginning. Each Israelite family had to accurately determine their tribe to know where they should dwell. We see that in the book of Joshua. They needed to accurately determine their tribe to see if they could qualify to function as a priest, or to transfer property, like we saw here. Even under Roman rule, the Roman census, had to bring Joseph back to Bethlehem. Of course, later in Philippians chapter 3, verse 5, Paul is very proud of and concerned with being a Benjaminite. The concern for pedigree. Verse 20. Aminadab begot Nasun, Nasun begot Salmon. Continuing to trace the line of Judah, in verse number 20, the list includes the mention of Nasun. Nasun was the leader of Judah. He was the leader of Judah during the wilderness wanderings. His sister, Nasun's sister, was married to Aaron the priest. Verse number 21. Salmon begot Boaz, and Boaz begot Obed. Salmon! Our friend Salmon. Mr. Salmon. Salmon. The father of Boaz, he would have been part of the first generation of Israelites born in Canaan after the Exodus, and he was married to Rahab. Okay? Finally, our last verse of the book, verse number 22. And Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. Verse number 22. This genealogical appendix shows that the motive contemplated by the author of this book, which according to tradition is Samuel, was to trace the genealogy of King David. The motive of the book is, this is like a quiz question. What's the motive of the author of the book? The motive of the author of the book was to trace the genealogy of King David by preserving the memory of a story of faith and love.
See that one more time?
The motive of the author of this book, which according to tradition is Samuel, was to trace the genealogy of King David by preserving the memory of a story of faith and love.